Something is happening in Berea right now that the NFL world hasn't fully processed yet. And I don't mean that in the vague, clickbait way that gets thrown around every offseason when a quarterback competition heats up and everyone pretends there's drama where there isn't any. I mean it in the specific, concrete. This is actually building towards something way that you can feel when you read between the lines of every practice report coming out of that facility. The OTAs have turned into something charged, something that veterans inside that building are paying attention to, something that has the front office, the coaching staff, and the owner of the franchise all moving in a direction that only makes sense if you've been watching Shedeur Sanders closely enough to understand what he's actually been showing people. Let me start with what I keep coming back to. 15 for 17, 5 touchdowns in a single practice session. Now I know OTAs aren't regular season football. I know the defensive intensity is different and the stakes are controlled, and none of it translates directly onto a box score in October. But here's what I also know. Experienced NFL evaluators do not stop mid-conversation to pay focused attention to something that isn't genuinely disrupting their expectations. These are people who have watched thousands of quarterback reps across decades of professional football. They have developed an almost automatic filtering system for separating noise from signal. And when those people stop what they're doing and genuinely focus, it means the signal is real. What's been happening at those OTAs with Shedeur Sanders has been producing that reaction repeatedly. Not once, not as an isolated moment, repeatedly. That matters. But before I get into where this is all heading, I need to go back. Because the context of last season is absolutely essential to understanding why everything happening right now feels so significant, and also why it carries a specific kind of frustration underneath the excitement. Last year was wrong. I'll say it plainly. The way Shedeur's development got managed in his rookie season, the depth chart decisions, the rep distribution, the organizational priorities that kept putting other names ahead of him, despite what competitive evaluation was actually showing. That entire structure was built to protect decisions that had already been made, rather than respond honestly to the evidence that was accumulating in front of everyone. And the player most visibly positioned above Shedeur throughout that process, despite what the honest football evaluation was suggesting, was Gabriel. The organization built an environment that served its prior commitments rather than its actual future. And Shedeur paid the developmental cost of that misalignment every single week. 7 starts. A 31st ranked offensive line. Pressure on more than half of his dropbacks. No real runway to build rhythm and timing with receivers. No organizational protection from the friction that comes when a building isn't fully aligned behind a quarterback. That's not development. That's survival. And Shedeur survived it. Which, if you think about it honestly, tells you something profound about the kind of competitor you're actually dealing with. Gabriel is gone now. The coaching staff has changed. The stated organizational philosophy has changed. Kevin Stefanski is out. The entire directional identity of the franchise has been restructured around building something new rather than protecting something old. And yet, and this is the part that genuinely gets under my skin when I sit with it, the dynamic that damaged Shedeur's rookie season is showing up again in a different form. The player at the center of the interference this time is Deshaun Watson, and the frustration isn't that Watson is competing. Competition is fine. Competition is actually healthy when it's honest. The frustration is that Watson's presence in this quarterback room, and specifically the way that presence is reportedly being leveraged to keep this competition framed as genuinely open, is generating the exact same kind of daily friction and organizational distraction that stunted Shedeur's growth during the most critical developmental stretch of his career. Different name, different circumstances, identical dynamic, and the most maddening part, this time the organization doesn't have the same excuse for letting it continue. Here's why that matters so much. Cleveland drafted Spencer Fano in the top 10. They didn't draft a lineman that high to protect a quarterback competition. They drafted him to protect one specific quarterback. They selected receivers in this offseason, specifically because of how their skill sets complement Shedeur's processing speed and timing-based game. KC Conception, Denzel Boston. Those are not generic additions designed to serve any quarterback. Those are targeted acquisitions that only make sense if you've already decided who you're building around. They installed a head coach, brought in Todd Monken's offensive system, with zero emotional investment in any decision made by the prior regime. Every organizational action this offseason has told the same story. And that story is not a quarterback competition. That story is a franchise getting aligned behind a specific quarterback and building the infrastructure he needs to succeed. Watson competing hard doesn't change that story. It just creates noise around it. And that noise has a cost. Now I want to talk about Jimmy Haslam. because I genuinely think this is the part of the story that deserves the most attention and has received the least. Haslam reportedly backing Shedeur with a commitment to give him the unquestioned starting opportunity for the first 5 to 6 games of the regular season. That is not a routine depth chart preference. That is an owner standing at the front of his own building and saying something that owners almost never say directly. The financial weight of the past is not going to override the competitive evidence of the present. $46 million already committed to Deshaun Watson does not automatically purchase a starting position in 2026. The sunk cost of the most expensive contract in NFL history is going to be separated from the football question of who gives this team the best realistic chance to build something worth building. Shedeur Sanders is going to get the opportunity that his talent and his preparation and his demonstrated composure under pressure have been earning him since he walked into that building. I want you to sit with that for a second, because Haslam has not always been the owner who makes the bold call when it's uncomfortable. His history in Cleveland includes plenty of decisions where organizational pressure and financial entanglement produced outcomes that protected the institution rather than served the football team. The fact that he is reportedly stepping in now, in the middle of an active quarterback competition with significant financial stakes on the other side of the ledger, and putting his full backing behind a second-year quarterback who just turned 24, tells you something real about what the people at the very top of this organization have concluded after watching Shedeur work. They've stopped pretending the outcome is uncertain. And when ownership stops pretending, the conversation is functionally over. 5 to 6 games. I want to explain why that specific commitment is so much more meaningful than it might sound on the surface. Young quarterbacks don't develop in a clean upward line where every week is measurably better than the last and the growth is always visible in the final score. That's not how it works. Development is messy and non-linear and deeply contextual. There are games where everything connects and games where nothing does, and games where the most important growth is happening in ways that won't appear anywhere in the statistical summary, but are completely visible to a coaching staff that understands what they're actually evaluating. A 5 to 6 game commitment gives Shedeur something that almost no young quarterback gets in the modern NFL: the ability to have a difficult Sunday without immediately losing the job to the circumstances of one afternoon. It gives him the space to process the inevitable defensive adjustments that come when coordinators get real film and start designing pressure packages built specifically around his tendencies. It gives him the time to build chemistry with his receivers through live game repetitions under actual competitive stakes, the kind of chemistry that cannot be manufactured in OT, as regardless of how well those sessions go. That runway is not a gift. It is the minimum amount of real evidence necessary to make an intellectually honest assessment of what a young quarterback actually is when he's genuinely supported rather than just surviving whatever environment gets constructed around him. And here's where I want to push back on the people who are framing Cleveland's ceiling as modest or uncertain. Let me tell you what this roster actually is when you put the pieces together honestly. The defense was top 5 in the league last season. Top 5. That doesn't evaporate because you change quarterbacks. Myles Garrett is still there. The defensive infrastructure that kept Cleveland competitive, even through the offensive dysfunction of Shedeur's rookie season, is still largely intact and in some areas improved. A defense that good can keep games close and manageable even on weeks when the offense is still finding its rhythm, which is exactly what a developing young quarterback needs in his first real season of full organizational support. Now add an offensive line that has been specifically rebuilt around protection rather than just general competence. Add the receiving weapons that were chosen because of how they complement Shedeur's specific game. Add Todd Monken's offensive intelligence, a coordinator who knows exactly how to construct game plans that put a quick processing, timing-based quarterback in advantageous situations week after week without asking him to do things that don't fit his natural profile. Then put Shedeur Sanders behind all of that instead of behind the 31st ranked line he was working with last year. And the jump in performance you'd project isn't incremental, it's significant. The conference finals isn't a fantasy in that context. I mean that seriously. The AFC is talented, nobody's going to pretend it isn't. But no conference is closed to a team with a top 5 defense, a genuinely developing young quarterback with real organizational support, and the kind of directional momentum that builds when an entire building gets aligned behind one clear vision at the same time. January football is different from September football. Hot teams do things in the playoffs that no preseason prediction fully accounted for. And the margin between a team that makes a deep run and a team that goes home early is often determined by decisions that happen in September and October, specifically by whether a young quarterback spends those early months building genuine confidence and rhythm through supported starts, or whether he spends them surviving a hostile developmental environment for the second consecutive year. The 5 to 6 game commitment gives Shedeur the foundation to build the right trajectory. And a quarterback who builds the right trajectory in September is a completely different weapon in January than one who's still fighting for organizational trust. Here's what keeps striking me about Shedeur as a person, separate from the football evaluation entirely. This is a 24-year-old who came into the NFL carrying more weight than almost any quarterback prospect in recent memory. The comparisons to his father, the draft process drama, the organizational dysfunction of his rookie year, the daily competition with players who were being positioned above him despite what the competitive evidence was showing. And through every single one of those things, every instance of interference with his development, every narrative that was working against him, every environment that was not built for him to succeed, he kept showing up more prepared than the day before. He kept responding to doubt with work. He kept bringing composure into moments that were specifically designed to test whether he had any. That's not a coincidence. That's not luck. That's character. And character is the thing that separates the quarterbacks who anchor franchises for a decade from the ones who look promising for 2 seasons and then disappear when the circumstances get hard. Shedeur has shown you his character over and over again. The question is whether the organization around him is finally ready to fully trust what it's been shown. Watson's determination to make this a real competition, to refuse the supporting role that every honest organizational signal has been pointing him toward, I understand it on a human level. He's a competitor. He's also sitting on a contract situation that makes his position in this building uniquely complicated. But understanding it doesn't make it less damaging to what Cleveland is trying to build. The friction is real. The distraction is real. The daily cost of an unsettled quarterback situation, even one where the outcome seems increasingly clear to the people who are watching the most carefully, is real. Organizations that get quarterback decisions right do so by getting them right decisively. The teams that win Super Bowls with young quarterbacks don't get there by half committing to their starter and keeping the competition technically alive for optics. They get there by putting the full weight of the organization behind one player and building everything, scheme, roster construction, schedule management, practice structure, around making that player as prepared and confident and supported as possible. That's the commitment Cleveland needs to make completely. And based on everything coming out of that building right now, they are getting closer to making it with every day that passes. The firestorm at OTAs is real. The Watson friction is real. The $46 million sitting in that quarterback room generating organizational pressure is real. None of those things are dismissible. But here's what else is real. A coaching staff that has made its building intentions visible through every personnel decision this offseason. An owner who has reportedly drawn a line around Shedeur's opportunity that the financial weight of the past cannot cross. A player who has responded to every obstacle in his path by becoming more prepared, more composed, and more demonstrably ready for the opportunity he's been building toward. And a group of veteran football evaluators inside that facility who have stopped conversations mid-sentence to pay attention to what Shedeur Sanders has been doing on that practice field. The noise doesn't change the signal. It just makes the moment when the organization fully commits feel more urgent and more meaningful when it finally arrives. 10 years. I genuinely believe that's the realistic ceiling of this quarterback in this system if the alignment becomes complete and unconditional. Not because anyone can promise 10 years in April before a regular season snap has been taken, but because the quarterbacks who anchor franchises for a decade are not always the ones who arrive already finished. They're the ones who arrive with the right foundation, the processing speed, the accuracy under pressure, the composure in chaotic moments, the character to keep building through every difficult phase, and then get the genuine organizational commitment that allows that foundation to develop into something sustained and dominant. Shedeur has that foundation. He has demonstrated it repeatedly and specifically in contexts that were actively working against him. What happens when those same qualities get the full support of a rebuilt offensive line, targeted receiving weapons, a defensive infrastructure that keeps games manageable, and a coaching staff whose entire offensive architecture was constructed around his strengths? I think Cleveland is about to find out, and I think what they find is going to surprise everyone who wasn't paying close enough attention to see it building from the beginning. Get aligned, get clear, point everything in one direction without reservation or interference from dynamics that serve yesterday's decisions rather than tomorrow's possibilities. And then let Shedeur Sanders show you what 10 years of this actually looks like, because this city has been waiting a long time for a quarterback worth building around, and the evidence says that quarterback is already in that building. Cleveland just needs to fully trust what it's been shown.